One. So we're live. So we are joined today by Patrick M. Byrne, the man who's been called the Bitcoin Messiah. And he really doesn't need an introduction, but we're going to do it anyway. So Dr. Byrne is CEO of Overstock.com, the e-commerce giant that was voted one of the most trustworthy companies in America in 2014. And in 2017 was valued at about 1.5 to 2.25 billion. And that's just the e-commerce side of it. Dr. Byrne has also been making headlines recently with tZero, one of the first security token exchanges, which recently closed its security token offering. We're excited to learn from this classic liberal today on a Bit Cryptic podcast. So my name is Jeff Peterson.
I'm Alain León, aka Bitcoin Van Gogh.
And welcome. It's good to have you here, Patrick.
Very glad to have you.
And Bitcoin Van Gogh, it's such an honor to be on your show. Thank you.
I really hope you keep calling him Bitcoin Van Gogh. I call him Alain, but
I love it. It's fine. Either one is fine.
Well, if he goes to all that trouble to brand himself as Mr. I'll just call him Mr. Van Gogh then, I guess.
No, but yeah. Van Gogh is fine.
So we want to start first with like kind of a general Bitcoin question, since it's not every day we get to talk to the guy known as Bitcoin Messiah. So Peter
that doesn't boil an egg. That in a cup of that in $1 or that in $10 will get you a latte at Starbucks.
I'm not sure what that means, but I like it.
It's an old, you're too young to know. It used to be a saying that in a quarter will get you a cup of coffee, meaning that's worth zero. That plus a quarter will get you a cup of coffee. But I was trying to update it for the modern times.
For the millennials.
Right.
So basically you're being humble, but we're not letting you being humble right now. We're gonna up your status to grandiosity. Okay. So Peter Schiff and Paul Krugman, who are, for the audience members who don't know, they're both well-known economists. They're both well-known
economists. Yeah.
I'm already screwing up the first question. Damn. Who are well known for speaking out against Bitcoin, saying that it isn't real money and it's going to zero. Why are these guys saying that? And are they wrong? What is it that they're not seeing, or are they right? And are we all fools for even being on this podcast in the first place?
No, they're definitely not right. Krugman was a great economist before he went crazy. Though he did go crazy, and you're not to take what he said too seriously. Look at what Paul Krugman said about the fax machine and the internet and stuff like that back. Krugman is won a Nobel for explaining how things happened after the fact, not for predicting anything before it happened. And I think Peter Schiff, it surprised me that Schiff has taken the position he has. Maybe he's just talking his own book. But Schiff is a gold bug. And Schiff, if you're a gold bug, you understand why gold is real money and fiat currency ultimately is vapor. And that is, fiat currency can be created at the stroke of a pen of some government mandarin somewhere. But gold cannot be created by anyone's pen other than God, I guess God's pen. But other than that, no mandarin can sign something, create new gold. So that's why gold is a better form of money. It's a better medium through which we can communicate to each other information about value and scarcity, money based on something that's limited in supply. Well, if you understood that, you would think, which Peter Schiff does, you would think he would then see the virtues of Bitcoin, which is limited in supply not by the physical universe, but by mathematics. So if Schiff really, and I know Schiff, I've met him in passing, he's been on the show a couple of times. I'd say that if he really understood the reason gold was good, gold and silver, then he would be behind Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin has all those advantages of gold, of it's divisible and it's immutable and all that kind of stuff, but you can beam it across the universe. You can beam Bitcoin across the universe. Gold, you have to carry it around. So it's go ahead.
Yeah, no. So what is it that he's not getting? He's famous for having these debates with Eric Voorhees, and they've gone back and forth. And he should be sort of being out there supporting Bitcoin. He's a libertarian, sort of, classic liberal as well. So what is it that he's not getting?
Well, part of it may be, that's what I mean by the San Wall Street, someone is talking their book, means that they're out there saying to the public what benefits their own investment. Since he's already in gold and silver, he probably doesn't want to see people who want relief from fiat currency coming into Bitcoin. He wants them to come into gold and silver. Maybe it's as simple as that. I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe it's as simple as that. But he doesn't get it. He does not get the virtues of Bitcoin.
Okay, now on the other side, we have Jack Dorsey, right? The CEO of Twitter, and he's famous for having said that the internet and the world is going to have one currency, and that he personally believes that it's going to be Bitcoin. Now, is there a path to this end game? Is he like way out there, way off the mark? What do you think about that?
No, he's not off the mark at all. You know, Bitcoin has emerged. One does have to say, I do think that 95% of the cryptocurrencies out there are going to go to zero. And I think there was a lot of bad stuff went on last year, and people, let's just say, I'm not a lawyer, but they sure look like they were pushing the edge of the law to me. If you're out there raising capital from the public, you know, you got to be careful, and there are rules to follow. And I think
a lot of gunslingers raising capital in a way that was more like a Wild West than a actual like regulated money raise.
Yeah. You know, we used to live in a country where people drove around in cars with trunks full of penny stock certificates, and they'd go to grandma on a farm and swindle her out of a farm for some worthless stock. And so even though I'm a libertarian in general, I'm sort of like the proverbial, you'll probably get letters on this, but I'm like the proverbial Christian Scientist with appendicitis. You know, that's another joke that before your time, but I'm a classical liberal. I don't like paternalism, but I think when it comes to financial products, government does need to be somewhat paternalistic, because the financial industry, and I grew up in the financial industry, it draws more than its fair share of crooks, because every financial business has the model: you give me money today and I'll be doing something for you in the future. I'll fix your windshield. I'll pay your wife your widow benefits if you die, or whatever. All financial businesses have that model. So it's very handy for a swindler to step into a financial business. So you do need government. And so we, 80 years ago, put these rules in place to say, if you're raising capital from grandma on a farm, you know, there's some paternalism. We can't really just have a complete buyer beware world. And I'm not sure anymore, you know, the libertarian answer to that is that's a mistake, that you're better off doing what Japan does, which is like saying, look, we're not going to post a sign that says no sharks here. In other words, in their securities, there's no rules against insider trading. They say buyer beware. But in our world, anyway, my point is that I thought the ICO guys, some of them, most of them, push the edges very, very far. So on what you could do when you're raising money from the public. Jack Dorsey, I think he's correct. I think that we're going to have, with what we need, to return to what I was saying like 5 minutes ago, what economists say that what a price is a way to communicate two things: information about value and scarcity. We need a medium through which, an ether, through which we communicate that information. It would be great if the whole world had just one such medium like Bitcoin. If there's going to be any, I think that Bitcoin may be unbeatable. It's got such network effects now. It's extraordinary, and it may be unbeatable. Everything will ultimately end up getting anchored, I suppose, to Bitcoin. So Jack Dorsey could well be right. So
you think he's right? Do you have a time frame? I know everybody wants the answer to that question, even if it's a range.
Well, that's a great question. I think it's going to happen sooner than people expect. It's not going to happen by politicians. It's going to happen by it's when other things Chernobyl, when other systems Chernobyl melt down, is when Bitcoin takes off, and that's what happened in Crete, in Greece, and Venezuela, and different places. It's in Zimbabwe. It's as the currencies melt down, people start moving towards Bitcoin. So the question is, how long is we live on top of an inverted pyramid of Federal Reserve debt-based money multiplied through a Keynesian magic money tree spending system, when does this whole magical apparatus melt down? When that melts down is when Bitcoin takes off in the United States.
Okay, so no time frame. One quick question on that. So I don't know if you've heard of Ari Paul, but he's from Block Tower, and he makes a what I think is a good point on Bitcoin, and he says that Bitcoin is probably the only coin that is not competing on features, meaning that, you know, you have Ethereum and the Turing complete, and you have all these other coins with 1,000, 2,000, 100,000 transactions per second and all these other fancy things that they're trying to outdo each other. But Bitcoin is not doing that. Bitcoin doesn't need to do that. The features that it already has, you know, the biggest hash power and so on and so forth, is more than enough for it to survive. He's not saying that it's guaranteed that Bitcoin is going to survive, but essentially Bitcoin doesn't need to compete in features. What do you think about that?
I think that's smart. I think that Bitcoin, the question isn't going to be whether Bitcoin survives. To me, the question is, does anything else survive? You know, ultimately what you see, have you seen these graphs that show the market cap of dozens of coins? You know, after they get released, it goes up, and then they all kind of trail off. There's one that's held up over some years now, and it's Bitcoin. To me, the question is anything going to take a run at Bitcoin? I can tell you one coin that we're quite interested in, and we have contributed a lot to. It's an open source project called Raven Coin. And
Raven.
Do you know about Raven yet?
I'm not terribly familiar with it. No.
Got some very interesting properties, open source project. And if there's anything, you know, I don't want to slam Ether, and I know Vitalik and stuff,
yeah.
but I'm bothered by that whole fork thing. I mean, the whole point of this is anti-authoritarianism. You don't want some government to be able to say, you know, your coins count and your coins count, but you're the Dalai Lama, so your coins don't count because we say so. You don't want any. So the whole point of the exercise is to be outside of a world where there's any authority figure that can do that. And the fact, I mean, what do you think of the fact that Ether forked, and didn't somebody hack them $30 or $40 million, and they decided, some folks in Switzerland decided to reset it? And it seems to me that violates the spirit of things, but am I being too purist about this, Mr. Van Gogh?
It's tough to say. So I think you're referring to the DAO hack that caused them to fork some time ago.
Right.
As you say, the classic libertarian answer to that is to say no, they shouldn't have forked. You know, he saw it differently. I think his opinion, obviously, it wasn't his opinion, but I think his opinion carried a lot of weight, and that's what happened. I personally tend to think that this whole thing is a whole market, you know, test of how it's going to work out. I don't think it should have happened, but we'll see.
We'll see.
I also think people's views tend to change radically when they're the ones losing personally their savings. And, you know, a lot of people don't want regulations till it's you're the one who's out $1 million and want it back. So it's hard. I think, you know, in a world of classic liberalism, there still should be like at least a couple of safety nets, but what those look like, I'm not exactly sure. So I want to transition now to talking a little bit about what you guys are doing, or have been doing. So let's go back a little bit and talk about Overstock. So overstock.com was one of, if not the first major retailer to accept Bitcoin. So I'm curious, why did you guys do that? What was the decision process that happened there?
The decision process was deep down, the real decision process is I'm pro freedom. Mm-hmm. And once the people who are in favor of freedom, pro freedom people came along with this invention, I wanted to propel them and enhance it as best I could. And so arguably, I mean, a cynical view is I used my position to do that and bring them publicity. But that's not fair. I mean, it's not the whole story. What I was going through consciously, this is what happened. So I was tuned to it. I studied, oddly enough, the mathematics that underlies cryptography out at Stanford when I did my PhD. So when I first heard of Bitcoin, I was I understood what it was about and was intrigued by it. It was about a year later, I was starting to mention it around the company and telling people, we got to be thinking of this. And so we had all kind of agreed that in, I guess it was 2013 maybe, that we said at the beginning of, sometime at the end of the year, if we have some spare cycles, where we will set it so we could accept it. At the time, the largest company in the world taking Bitcoin was a restaurant in Australia of $800,000 a year revenue. And we were $1.4 billion. And I mentioned to a reporter, it was kind of funny, I mentioned on December 19th to a reporter that she asked at the end of a totally unrelated interview, hey, have you heard of this new Bitcoin thing? You think you're ever going to take it? And I said just offhand, casually, yeah, like maybe we will sometime next year. Well, she mentioned this in the article that maybe, and we'll do this. The next thing I know, I was getting Google alerts from all over the world and all these different languages.
That's amazing.
And that told me there were a bunch of people out there paying attention to this thing. And that's why instead of waiting a year, I got some people together and 2 weeks later, we started taking it. And what we unearthed was there was this huge global community. I had not yet figured out there was this global community of people waiting for that to happen. I just got that little hint.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. Now, so quick question. Does Bitcoin need to be transactional in order to survive? Or could it be, maybe something like, kind of like how gold is used today, is just kept in a vault somewhere and more as some type of reserve?
Well, it could survive just on that. It could survive just as a reserve. It will be nicer. There'll be less to worry about if it ever becomes a medium, a real currency or a reserve currency. Then it'll never go away. The history of money tends to be societies start off with barter, and they barter different commodities. And then what happens is people start noticing that one of the commodities that they are using to trade, let's say fish, is, everybody can accept fish because everybody needs a fish or something. You can always eat it. So in a barter economy, the commodity that becomes the most useful for bartering emerges as money. And that's the commodity that's most useful is the one that emerges and becomes the society's money. And so I think that the more Bitcoin gets embedded in processes and banking, and whether it's Bitcoin or crypto or blockchain or whatever you want to call it, our crypto revolution, the more it works its fingers into these different crevices in the system, what's going to happen is people are going to start realizing it's going to invert people's thinking ultimately. So we're involved in a company in Barbados that's doing blockchain central banking. And we want to help the central banks, and that's great. But we're looking at some other companies in that space. Let's say we get to a world where everybody has digital money on their phones. You have digital dollars, digital wherever, rupees, if you're in India, on your phone. Then when you want to go send them to other people, the rails can be crypto. The rails can be blockchain. Those kinds of systems are emerging in several countries. We're talking to several countries, frankly, and across, we've seen some announcements about Africa. You're going to see this stuff popping up, I think, this year. Some of these technologies actually rolling out this year. And what will happen is crypto and Bitcoin or Florin coin or Raven coin will be the backbone of a bunch of it. And then eventually people will start asking, why do we have to have all this junk on top of it? Why do we have all these banking systems and things called dollars or euros or whatever on top of it? We actually can just use the rails. And eventually this stuff will kind of wither away. You know how Marx always said the state will just wither away? I think as blockchain gets more infiltrated, the other stuff is just going to wither away.
So you want the crypto tentacles everywhere.
Right.
But you're not like, let's say, Roger Ver, who, he's known for saying that it's a requirement that Bitcoin is transactional in order to survive. You're saying it would be nice, but that it could survive, sort of as gold does today. It doesn't need to have that intermediate step that gold did, where at one point it was used transactionally.
I think more the latter, but I'd have to hear Roger's argument as to the former.
Okay.
So I want to transition now to a little bit what you guys are doing in terms of security tokens and exchanges and all that. First, let's start for the people in the audience who aren't familiar. What exactly is a security token? Can we discuss a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, a security token is, think of it like an ICO that follows the law. ICO only, they follow the law. That's a joke. It's a security token think of it, it's just like a share of stock. Think of it like that we're selling shares of stock, but they're going to be tokens rather than shares of stock. Now, that's at first glance, but what you can do with a security token is much more than you can do with a share of stock. Remember, if you own a share of stock in a company and there are, say, 1 million shares, then what that means is that that when whatever money they make, you're making 1/1,000,000th of. Well, so it's tied to the bottom line of a company. Security tokens are just like shares of stock, only the mechanics and technologies token, only they can be made much more sophisticated than just saying, oh, I'll take a share of the bottom line of your company, which means it's going to open up a whole new world of cooperation between people who save and people who, and entrepreneurs. And I can give you some examples if you want, but I think it's going to revolutionize entrepreneurship in America. Would you like me to walk you through an example, or is that a good enough answer?
I think that'd be great to walk through an example and kind of give people a visual of what we're talking about here.
Okay. Well, there's a company called Elio Cars, ELIO, and I'm not pushing, I'm just anybody's ICO or anybody's STO. Okay. Elio Cars is an American inventor from Detroit, worked with a very high-end design company for 10 years or so. He's invented a car that gets 84 miles to the gallon and costs $7,500 and has a 5-star safety rating. It's a 2-seat car, front and back, it's brilliant. $7,500. It's so cheap you can actually give it to poor people. Give them a credit card, a gas card, and say, buy your gas on this with this, and that's the car payments. And it's revolutionary that you can have a car for $7,500. The normal process for someone like him would be to go to Silicon Valley or a venture capitalist and say he needs $200 million to get this up and in production. So he's going to go see some venture capitalist who's got to make 3 decisions. Is there a market for, how big the market is there for this kind of a car? Secondly, how big a fraction of that market is this guy, Paul Elio, going to be able to steal? And then once he does do that and he has revenue, is he able to manage all the other lines on the income statement down to the bottom line and that I can have a share in? That's the third question. Those are 3 questions. Suppose instead Elio Cars comes out with a token that they're selling, and the token is, once they go into production, they know that this was the most successfully crowd-funded campaign ever, and it's got like 65,000 reservations or something. There's going to be when the cars are built, there's going to be a waiting line for them. So they're going to take 1 in 6 cars that come out of the factory and divert them. And instead of going to the people who've been waiting, they get auctioned. Your place in the auction, the price is still $7,500. Your place in the auction is determined by how many is you bid through the coins. So people would participate in the security token offering if what they wanted was to buy coins, so that when the car gets introduced, they don't want to wait in line. They want to advance to the front of the line and buy and so forth.
I see.
Why that's so fascinating to me, it's all about capital allocation, and the better society, the better the mechanism society has to allocate capital correctly, the better off we are. So imagine, instead of those 3 questions that I said the guy in Silicon Valley had to figure out, and what are the chances that some 8-year-old guy working in Silicon Valley can answer those 3 questions correctly? And if you knew, it's somewhat crapshoot that people get funds on. Instead, if it's out there, Paul Elio selling the security token, what's phenomenal is the security token, the sale of the security token replaces those 3 questions, because whether he can sell the coin or not is a proxy for the first 2 of the questions. how big is the market and can this guy get a share of the market is answered by, can he sell the coin? If he can't sell the coin, the answer to those two is no. If he can sell the answer to those two is high. And it obviates the need for having to answer the third question. You as the buyer of the token don't have to figure out, is Paul Elio going to be able to manage his factory down to the bottom line? All you care about buying the token is that you can advance your place in line for the auction. So it's radically simplified the questions that society have to answer in order to allocate capital. And it's actually created a very good proxy by saying, if you buy the coin, I mean, if you can sell the coin, there's a market for the car. And if you can't sell, so to me, it's a much more, I think it's going to lead to a better, much better capital allocation mechanism for American entrepreneurs and create a way for people to fund themselves. That model can be applied of using security tokens, like I just said, could be applied to building an interstate. It could be applied to pharmaceutical research. It could be applied to building a new apartment house and who gets to get apartments. And so the point is, security tokens ultimately are, think of them like shares of common stock, only much more intelligent. They don't have to be just a share of the bottom line. They can be tied to all kinds of other things and simpler things than the full bet on whether a guy can build a company. Sorry if that answer was longer than you hoped.
No, it's great. I think that spells out a lot of the advantages and why there's been so much hype about security tokens recently. A lot of people think this is going to be like the next big wave of innovation in cryptocurrency, and
it's going to change capital formation, because ultimately, all capital formation is a form of cooperation. We savers are going to give you money, Mr. Entrepreneur, and this bond or this preferred stock or this common stock, that's really a statement of how we're going to cooperate. You use the money and how we share the results. This is so disruptive. It creates a world where we can have much more forms of cooperation, which are much easier for people to bet on. And anyway, I think it's going to well, I'll put it this way. The head of NASDAQ, retired, Paul Greifeld, said in November that how did he put it? He said 100% of the stocks and bonds on Wall Street today could be tokenized, and in 5 years, 100% will be tokenized. What that means is stocks and bonds as you know them in 5 years, he is saying, won't be being issued. All that will be issued is security tokens, because security tokens can do anything that a stock and bond can do and about 1,000 times more. And because of that flexibility and how you can build all the code right into algorithms in the coin, that you can have much better deals for investors. Investors and entrepreneurs can have, I think, much more successful arrangements.
So if that's going to happen, and I don't know if it's going to happen in 5 years or whenever, but what happens to digital locate receipts? What happens to that system?
Oh, well, digital locate receipts is something we created to handle a process that's already being done on Wall Street. It's being done kind of in a pencil and paper way and not a very good way, with a bunch of slop in it.
And they make a lot of money off of this process, correct?
They make about, I've reported it before, it's over half of the revenue of Wall Street is actually from this process involving, it's supplying locates that support short selling. Now there's this false myth that I'm against short selling. I'm fine with short selling if it follows the law. And there's some sponginess in the law, basically, that everyone looked, anyway. All that sponginess can be taken out through the magic of blockchain and create a permanent, immutable system, totally transparent to regulators. There's a lot of cheating in this little corner of Wall Street, and that cheating is what lets them, why it ends up being over half their revenue. That cheating can all be eliminated through blockchain, and that's digital locate receipts.
Okay.
And we'll just keep doing it. We're building all kinds of products for Wall Street that use blockchain in them.
So basically, we're going to see blockchain versions of Wall Street in the future that's going to be smarter and without a lot of the problems that are existing today.
Exactly. Without the room for mischief that there's room for today. And there's a lot of mischief on Wall Street. And what we're doing is creating a version of Wall Street that is in many ways mischief proof. which is kind of, they'll have to come up with a new name for it, won't they, for Wall Street?
It's very, yeah, it's very funny, at least from my perspective, that we're talking about Wall Street, knowing that you, and for many years, you've sort of railed against them. And in your frame, you have the Pulp Fiction poster right behind you, and they're pointing right at your head. And I wonder if that, if Wall Street put that poster right there in your room.
They're coming for you after this.
They're gaining on me.
Yeah.
Right.
This is very much, this is like the most like Patrick Byrne thing I could think of possibly that you could do is create a security token exchange that essentially forcibly eliminates a lot of the things that you've been rallying against for so many years. So
disintermediates.
It's hilarious. I'm wondering, I don't mean to be too grandiose about it, but I've been wondering when people are going to start getting why that's so funny, Jeff, and people who know the history. And it's really, I figured it's something that someone would figure out like 20 years from now, but there's a real irony to me showing up, in 2000.
Did you do that on purpose, or is that just kind of how you found yourself now? Like,
just kind of stumbled around. It's kind of funny how the world works that way. In 2007, a very good guy on Wall Street, and a guy who's trying to help me, frankly, sat me down, and he called me, wanted to meet me, big hedge fund guy. I was flattered. I went to see him. And he sat me down. I was with my cousin. And he opened up the conversation saying, now this is January 07. He opened up the conversation saying, Patrick, I want you to know that you're the single most hated man I've ever known in my entire life. You used to be kind of a golden boy around Wall Street, but now you could kill people and we wouldn't hate you like we hate you in this town. So I hope someone carves that on my tombstone, that here lies the guy who in January 2007 was the most hated man. Because there was a reason. And the reason I was hated, because I was trying to explain there were some flaws in the settlement system and it was all going to melt down. And that's why everybody hated me.
Well, I mean,
how did you survive in the face of all that criticism? Like, I feel like most people would break under being hated by such a large group of people. Like, what kept you going during that?
It was pretty weird. Very few people ask me questions like that. It was pretty weird. It was insane. It was actually the only thing I've seen like it in my life is what we're now seeing with President Trump. Not that I'm a Trump supporter, but I mean, the way the media went after him, or is going after him, is like it went after me. It seemed even worse. I had people say that they were like, that this is the most yellow journalism since the 1920s. They just went after me. It's kind of funny. My father famously publicly said I should back out of the fight with Wall Street. And my mom called me up. And I don't think I've ever said this publicly, but my mom called me up after my father put a negative quote in the Wall Street Journal about he didn't back me and this and that. And my mom called me up and said, I will be so ashamed of you if you back out of this fight, Patrick. Do you think that there really are women? I had said in Fortune something about somewhere in America. I did say this in Fortune in 05. They had this big call out quote. It was supposed to embarrass me because I said crazy things like, somewhere in America, there's grandmothers eating dog food for dinner tonight so that some asshole on Wall Street can drive a Porsche. Well, I deliberately created that quote because it was something they could understand what I was trying to say. No one was getting that was going on. And so Fortune published that as like, what a lunatic. Anyway, my mom called me and said, do you think that grandmoms are eating that people on Wall Street are ripping off grandmas? I said, and this is like 05, 06. I said, Mom, on my eyes, I know that's what's going on. I know all these ways it's happening. And she said, I'll be so ashamed of you if you ever back out of this fight that year. She's never talked to me this way in her life. She said, don't consider yourself a member of my family if you back out of this fight.
Wow. That's amazing. So here's your dad fighting you publicly, and then your mother's like, no, you have to do this.
Yeah. That's what really happened. So I've been sitting in front of judges where people why did you do this fight? Well, it really came down to my mom was absolutely right. It was absolutely the right thing to do. I thought the only thing I did to protect myself, that I eventually in October 06, I couldn't believe the system was still holding together. I was involved in a very intimate way in certain aspects of the system, and I knew it was destabilizing. I'm surprised it took me as long as it did. I went over to Switzerland and I made a great big bet on gold. So with cash in Switzerland, so that if I thought the U.S. might just be sliding off a cliff, and that bet paid off big. And to be honest, I took that and I put it all back into fighting Wall Street with it. I took all the profit from that. It really maybe I got a little bit like Ahab. I became Ahab pursuing the white whale, and it almost took me down.
So Wall Street essentially funded you to fight Wall Street.
Yeah.
It's a good metaphor for Wall Street. It's a little suicidal at some points.
Yeah. It's like Castro. Didn't Castro, the big break was when he conquered some armory in the east of Cuba that then he was able to use the guns to take over the rest of Cuba.
Yeah, but let's not. I don't think you want to be comparing to Castro.
So just talking a little bit more about tZero before we move on. I'm curious, what separates you guys from, say, Temblum or Open Finance, who are trying to do similar things and create this security token exchange?
People are trying to do similar things. I think we're much farther along. We bought a few years ago a corner of Wall Street that does routing. So we're wired into the national market system already. And we got an ATS, which is a SEC listed private exchange. It's a dark pool, they call it. And we got permission for it to do blockchain instruments back in 2015. Then we don't just talk about this stuff, we actually do it. We did the world's first private blockchain instrument, a $5 million bond with a place called First New York Securities. And then we did a public instrument, again, not big on Wall Street standards, tiny, $13 million offering of a public blockchain security, OSTKP. And having done that, and that took tens of millions of dollars. We're like an icebreaker plowing through this ice field that no one's ever gotten through. Now the guys in the rowboat behind us are going to have a lot easier time of it. It's a lot, right. But the first guy who breaks through that ice field, if you knew how many tens of millions of dollars we have spent on all the regulatory stuff and the legal stuff, the SEC. But anyway, we've done a private blockchain security. We got an S3 through the SEC, a blockchain S3, and then we issued a blockchain S3. And now we're in business with a partnership with Boston Options Exchange. It's one of 13 lit exchanges in the country. And we have a deal where we're creating in Boston, we are creating a security token exchange. And there's a big advantage to having an exchange over just an ATS. So those are all these things we've gotten since we got our ATS 3 years ago. The other people that you mentioned are trying to get an SEC approved or an ATS approved to do blockchain. And we got there 3 years ago and we've done all these things past it. So that's the answer.
So you're way ahead of them, have more experience. Now, is tZero going to handle primary issuance? Is there going to be a secondary market? Are you going to handle derivatives? That's a big question. What do you say to that?
Yes, and eventually. Yes, and eventually.
Cool. Okay. So I know you have to go in about 9 minutes of the hard stop.
No, this is fun. Let's keep going.
Yeah, I mean, we'll keep going forever if you are willing to stay.
I've had a little bit of time. Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, just give us a 10-minute warning, when we have to start closing out. So one thing I wanted to know is you've just kind of generally, you've had a lot of success in your career, and a lot of people, are wondering kind of how you got there. What do you think are some of the most important lessons you've learned throughout your life that have guided your success?
Well, first of all, I should make clear, I've had extraordinary tailwinds in my life. I've had the most ridiculous tailwinds in my life that you can imagine. It's silly. My family lived there. My father was an Air Force ROTC guy, but was an actuary, and my family lived the Horatio Alger dream. So we went from sort of, lower income to affluent over the course of my first 20 years. So I had this.
Your father was the founder of Geico, right?
Not the founder, but he was an actuary that got hired to run Geico when Geico was going bankrupt in the mid 70s and almost went bankrupt. and they couldn't get anyone to run it. And they got my father to run it for what was supposed to be going through bankruptcy. And he went down to run. It was much, and he took it over, and it was much smaller. And he figured out a way to save it. And it was, they had 10,000 people. He said, if we fire 7,000 of them, and if we get out of the state of New Jersey and we raise 70 million more, and he saved Geico. And about a month later, he got a phone call that some fellow in Omaha was buying up his stock and wanted to meet him. And so that guy came and met my dad and started staying with us and started teaching me about the world. And I thought he was this farmer who I really did. I thought I was 13. I thought he was this farmer who knew a lot about stocks, because he always made time for me. He would always send ahead word, I'm going to be there next Tuesday. Make sure Patrick takes 2 hours off of school on Tuesday at 1:00. And my parents, who never let me skip his day of school, always let me hang out with this guy. And through my teenage years, he taught me a whole bunch of things. And of course, that farmer from Nebraska turned out to be Warren Buffett. And when I was
casual.
Yeah.
Well, no one, he didn't, no one, his name, I don't think it had even been in the paper when I know him. He was this very reclusive guy out in Omaha that just was a wonderful teacher. And he's had a big formative influence on my life. And I was in college. I was ending college when his name appeared in the paper for the first time, an article he wrote in Barron's. And he started becoming this really famous guy. But until then, he was and I worked for him for a time. And he was really my formative, my coach in business.
All right.
That
So
was the first big advantage. And if you want that advantage, read a book by Roger Lowenstein called Buffett, The Making of an American Capitalist, which is, I think, the best book on Buffett, and I think that book's as good as getting an MBA if you really read that book and absorb it. Because what Buffett is not a businessman. He's a guy who figured out the world, he's kind of a philosopher, and then he applied it to business. But he really has a lot more to say than just about business, and that's a good book to learn it from.
So we'll link that up in the show notes for anyone who wants to read that and get their book-based MBA.
Right.
Yeah. So, well, I'm sure it was more than just tailwind, right? I'm sure you have other stories of things you've done, to get where you are today.
Oh yeah. Well, I worked pretty hard. I had an interesting 20s, since you're asking. My 20s, I got out of college, and within a couple of weeks of getting out of college, I had sort of crawled through my last 6 months of college with all these back problems and stuff, which I attributed to I'd been a college football player. And I thought, geez, everything was hurting and hurt. Anyway, I got through college. It turns out I was filled with cancer. And I actually had cancer 3 times in my 20s. And I spent most of my 20s, I spent 3 years in hospital, and then I spent years recovering. So really, I didn't have the stamina to do anything but academia. Not that academia is easy, but it's easier from a physical point of view. And that's why I got my PhD and ended up in Stanford studying. I was kind of an invalid and going in, and that's when I was studying cryptography and such. So I had interesting 20s, but it did teach me, I'd say, actually, when I think of what made me a success, it's been having the right teachers. It's been having the right teachers and the right heroes. So much of life is having the right heroes, which I feel, society today produces a lot of kids without without parents and without. I'm not sure kids are getting the right heroes, but if you want to change society, you change what counts as heroic in it.
Yeah, and that so Thomas Sowell, before we started, we talked a little bit about it, right? And that's one of the things he says, that the family is so important. And he brings up that having both a mother and a father in a home are important, and we're not seeing that. Now, I wanted to ask you, what does your Dutch uncle think about all your forays into crypto?
Well, he, of course, has publicly said,
Mm-hmm.
And we have a deal. I don't talk too much about what he says privately other than general lessons, but we have he thinks it's all a big scam and it's all going to go to, he says a bunch of these coins are going to go to zero. And I think he's right. I think 90% are going to go to zero. I think that, but he also says, look, I don't know. Well, what he actually said was, I don't know. He always prides himself on being anti-technology, and the most complicated technology in his office is a yellow legal pad and a pen. That's his technology that he was fortunate with. But he does say, Patrick, I don't understand this blockchain stuff, but I talked to Bill, and Bill said this is going to be really big. You know who means by Bill, I take it.
Bill Gates. Yeah.
But he thinks he is, and he's seeing, there's a lot of what you don't want. There are aspects of human nature you don't want to see in the financial world, and that's the hype and the pumps and dumps and all the riffraffy stuff that we have to be careful about. So when he sees the get rich quick stuff, the underlying technology, what he's saying is he doesn't understand the underlying technology, but Gates does, and Gates knows that this is told him this is going to be big. But the betting on coins and drawing the general public into betting on coins when maybe they don't understand, and maybe the people creating the coins are just some guy who put a term paper up on the internet some weekend and now he's raising $20 million. That's pretty dangerous stuff for society. I'm afraid it's going to turn out to be, I hate to sound like an old fogey here, I'm afraid someday that's going to tarnish us like the Mt. Gox and Silk Road stuff did. The first 2 or 3 years I was doing interviews about all this stuff, and I'd be explaining blockchain and crypto and how it's going to change the world. Journalists would say, yeah, but isn't Bitcoin used for ecstasy dealing? I'd say, lady, last I checked, US dollars used for ecstasy dealing too. It doesn't, but I mean, we couldn't get people over that. Well, if 90% of these coins go to zero, it's going to really stigmatize us again, and we're going to have some harder work in the future.
So he doesn't understand it, right? But Bill does, and you think it's going to revolutionize the world essentially.
Yeah.
And you're into several projects, right? One of them is the Medici land governance, correct? And that's been working with the World Bank, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
and it's creating pilot programs to secure tenure and so on and so forth. Now, that to me seemed a little bit almost out of left field for Overstock to have such a subsidiary. I mean, what is it? What is the nature of that? Is it philanthropy? Are you making money off of that somehow? Is it a business? How did you get there? And why the name Medici?
Okay. Well, we took all of our blockchain efforts and we called them Medici. Medici was a family from Florence who actually traded with the Middle East and learned double entry bookkeeping. The Muslims came up with double entry bookkeeping, and they brought it to Florence and introduced what became modern banking, the Bank of Medici, and became this very powerful Italian family. And I just liked it because they introduced this new form of keeping a journal, and a ledger, and changed Western history. Medici land governance is, the thesis 5 years ago when we started to get into blockchain was there's a new age coming to humanity riding on blockchain. Let's own investments in the most fundamental processes of the new age. To me, those would be the formation of capital, which really starts with land titling, because it's once you have rule of law and you have land, and we say you own this piece of land, you own this piece of land, so rule of law exists. The first thing that comes into that is we title up land. So capital becomes possible through land titling. So we need money, so a central bank, although we'd all prefer a form of money that doesn't need a central bank.
Right.
Like gold. But we're not going to, how do you get the public to eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So central banking, then a capital market, then commerce and supply chains, and then voting. So those 5 layers are the business thesis of our investment fund called Medici. Let's get in companies that do blockchain meets land governance, blockchain central banking, blockchain Wall Street, blockchain commerce and supply chain, and blockchain voting. And so we went out looking for those investments, and where we couldn't find them, we started them ourselves. tZero is an example of the third. We own 80% of that company. Blockchain land governance, yes, we formed a company, Medici Land Governance. It's working with the World Bank. We just announced a significant project or good project in Africa. I can tell you I think this week I'm working, I just said goodbye to somebody. I was jetting over to Africa, to a different country in Africa, because we're hoping to have a significant, an announcement I'm very excited about. Now, I don't want to say significant, who knows what's material first, but I mean, it could change a whole country in Africa. And to be honest, there's a line of countries who want this. What's starting to happen, we heard from one country in the last week, another extremely large, significant country that says, well, to be honest, they're talking ridiculous sums to us for us to go over, and I'll bring them all 5 layers. So they could, like this, in the space of a matter of months, jump to have the world's most sophisticated land governance, the world's most sophisticated central bank, a blockchain central bank where everyone just downloads an app on their phone, and now you've got a monetary system that's better than what we have in the West. A monetary and financial system that's better than blockchain Wall Street. Well, we have that in tZero, and we have investments in the 2 leading blockchain voting companies, which are called Votes. We have a investment in Votes. There's another great one called Votum.
Okay. So essentially, you're restructuring how the whole government works through blockchain, and this country in Africa, or these countries, will be the test platform to see, and show the world how well this can work.
And the Caribbean, and you know what? They're going to have better systems than we have. For 70 years, we've been telling them, copy our systems, copy our SEC, copy our Citibank, copy our Wall Street. Problems emerge, and all the same problems that we've had. And if they can go to a world, if you have a world where 5 billion, there's 7.5 billion people on Earth, 5 billion of them don't live in the world as you and I know it, no legal rights, no property rights or anything. If we are successful with the Medici land governance, now 5 billion people have access. They have trillions of dollars worth of capital. They can start saving it and sharing it with each other through peer-to-peer lending apps on the phone. And in other words, you can create all the functions of a modern financial system overnight on a laptop and with some free downloadable apps. And you know what? That means that poor African country doesn't have to build its own Wall Street, doesn't have to build its own Citibank. It can leap to the front. I know this is, I'm talking my own book, but this isn't just historical, but this is biblical.
So there's
and then the Messiah comes in right there.
Yeah, right there, right? He says he's not, but it turns out he is.
The big reveal.
There is this guy, Hernando de Soto, and he's talked a lot about this over the years. He says that, it can really help indigenous populations and so on and so forth. And he thinks this is almost the basis of a society, is the ability to say, you own this is yours. Now, so my question is, what you're doing is not necessarily philanthropic, it's business, but it could potentially fix a lot of these issues that populations that do not have property rights encounter. Yes.
I know Hernando. I know him well. Hernando and I have a history. I like Hernando. Hernando is Peruvian, and he's arguably the last time the West beat a terrorist movement is when we beat Sendero Luminoso in Peru. And it was really a pretty bad movement, people getting scalps and stuff like that. And he convinced Peru to let, anyway, he's the guy who promulgated these theories 27 years ago. I love the theories. I'm actually, we'd like to work with Hernando. We've had a little bit of trouble getting that over the finish line. So we're working with the World Bank now, but there's always room for Hernando, and I hope we're able to get that sealed up. But in the meantime, the World Bank has opened up all kinds of doors for us. Yeah, Hernando wrote a great book called The Mystery of Capital, which in 18 years ago, the subtitle was Why Capitalism Worked in the West and Failed Everywhere Else. And what it really comes down to is, his argument is that the United Kingdom and the US and Canada got land titling right. And once you have land titling right, then you have a piece of paper that a guy can take to a bank and say, I want to borrow some money and start a hardware store, and capitalism gets going. But if you're living in some favela outside of Rio, and you may have been living there for 4 generations in this hut, and you don't know if the local generalissimo is going to show up someday and say, "No, senor, that was not your land. That was my grandfather's land." So you don't have any incentive to improve it. You don't have a piece of paper that you can take and say, "Let me borrow $2,000 and start a fruit stand." Capitalism never gets going. It's just in quicksand. And so you have to start with that step. It's kind of funny. Hernando noticed this. It's one of these things that he noticed it and wrote a couple fabulous books. And it's like you can't believe people didn't see it until then. It's so obvious once you get it. It all starts there. But it's somehow 100 years of economists had overlooked that simple fact.
And so now you noticed it. You're working with it, and we want to say that you're working with the World Bank. And if you want to make the announcement right here, right now, on a Bit Cryptic about any particular country that you're working with, we're not going to say no.
We're not going to stop you.
I would love to. There's literally a guy on a plane tonight to a different country in Africa to sign an MOU. I will tell you that I had a great conversation just 2 months ago with the African Development Bank and the people at the top. And they finished the conversation saying they're wonderful people. And saying we've got 54 countries and 1.2 billion people waiting for you to get on a plane and come over here and implement this stuff you've been talking about. So we have people living in Africa now, and there's a number of projects that are going to come our way. There's a number of projects that I hope are coming our way, and that's what I think. I say it's biblical because the Bible says the poor ye shall always have with ye, and I wonder maybe not. I think we might be able to fix this really quickly to the point I'm maybe getting out of the retail business so I can just focus on that for 5 years. I think 5 billion people, 5 years. I know this is crazy sounding or narcissistic or megalomaniac to say. I think that for 5 years, 5 billion people, we can really make a significant change. And but the beauty is it all comes down to apps and mobile phones. Economists for decades have been lamenting that the problem of the unbanked, 89% of the world doesn't have a bank account, so they're not tied into anything and they don't get the benefit. Well, everybody has a phone. Turns out everybody has a phone. Even in poor countries, there's 140% cell phone penetration because people have two. So everybody has a phone. So if you can take the construction of a whole modern banking and financial and even government systems and reduce it to apps that run, blockchain apps that run on phones, you can help these countries leap past us if we don't get, in terms of the sophistication of their systems.
Yeah, what a bizarre world it could be in 10 years, and seeing these countries that have banking systems and title systems and all of that, like well beyond our own. I think it would be a fantastic and interesting future.
From your lips to God's ears.
So I think we're running short on time, but is there anything?
I will tell you this: I have a board call in 4 minutes to get something approved that you'll be reading an announcement about. Inshallah.
Perfect. So, is there anything else you want to talk about that we haven't touched on before we close out the call?
No, but I want to tell you both that I have enjoyed the call, and let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I love that.
Okay.
Once your lips aren't so sealed. So where can people find out more about what you guys are doing and reach out?
I am Patrick at Overstock. Hey, why don't I do this? I'll make a deal. When is this podcast going to play?
Probably like a month, a little over a month and a half, maybe.
Okay, I'll make a deal. When this plays, if anyone writes me, I'm getting dirty looks from the person who's going to have to do the actual work. If anyone wants to write me, patrick@overstock.com, I'll give you a free $20 Club O membership. It's worth $20, It's not curing cancer, but if you want, we'll give you a $20 value. But let's say within 48 hours of this podcast going live, I don't want to be hearing from people years from now, but when this goes live, within 48 hours, if you write patrick@overstock.com, I'll give you a free Club O. How about that?
Sounds awesome.
Amazing. And we won't put that in the notes. We'll have to make people listen to the whole thing to get the benefit. But yeah, that sounds great. Right. I want a free Club O.
Okay.
All right, Patrick. Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much for coming on. Good luck with your meetings. I know you're busy guys, so thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us. It's been super fascinating getting to learn from you.
Let's do it again. Let's do it again in a few months after a few more announcements.
Sounds good, Patrick. See ya.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you
All
both.
right. Have a great rest of your evening.